morning, I would like to read, Lord be pleased, my opening text before we sing our opening hymn. And I ask you to pay close attention to the words that are reading. It's out of Psalm number 55. Psalm number 55. Victoria, if you guys, if you would, when we come to the word dove, translate that for your mother. Okay. Psalm number 55. This psalm has meant a lot to me over the years. It's been a great comfort to me. It's a passage that I've used both in and out of its context, and it is true in both cases. In Psalm 55, in verse number 6, David said, "Oh, that I had wings, like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest. Lo, then would I wander far off and remain in the wilderness, Selah. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest." Can you translate that for your mother? Okay. Oh, you got Spanish words? Okay, good. So you're going to stand up. Okay, good. All right. Come with me. So hymn number 108. Hymn number 8. 180, I'm sorry, 180. Hymn number 108. My mind's on several things at once, and I'm a little blank. The brain cell doesn't do that very well. You'd like to stand. The title of this hymn is "Come, All Ye Mourning Pilgrims." If you would bear with me, I'd like to read my text again. David, in a time of great distress, said this, "And I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away, and I'd be at rest. Lo, then would I wander far off, and remain in the wilderness, Selah. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest." If you're ever in the forest, in the woods, and you hear doves cooing, there's not a more lovely but yet mournful sound to fall on your ears. If you're ever in the woods and you hear those doves cooing, you know that all is well. If you hear the hard beat of the dove's wings, you know that either you or something else has frightened that dove and it's flying away. If it's not you that's frightened it, you better find out what it was. Because if it was a threat to the dove, it's probably a threat to you. I want to tell you something that I saw right out this back door here several years ago. You see the dove and you think that dove, they are very timid. They're meek. They're meek creatures. In years past, I used this office as my study. One morning, I had parked out back, and I was going out the back door to, I don't remember where I was going. I was going somewhere. But when I opened the door, I heard the most awful noise you've ever heard in your life. What I saw coming from this side was a hawk that had a dove in its talons. Right in front of me, across there. Right behind that hawk was that dove's mate. That dove was attacking that hawk. That dove was pecking the hawk and was so ferocious that by the time the hawk got to the fence on the other side, it released that dove in its talons. And those two doves flew off together. Doves mate for life. One of the most beautiful pictures of union in God's creation. I have often sat and watched doves feeding. If you will notice, when you see a pair of doves, a male and a female, are feeding, that is, the female moves off to the right of feeding. Shortly, the male would follow her, feeding. Then if a male moves off to the left of feeding, then shortly the female will follow her. They will cross the yard of feeding, always not very far apart, because they're bound together. Once I was sitting in a park watching a pair of doves feeding, marveling at their beauty, and the window down, listening to their cooing. It was such a mournful, but a peaceful sound. They were communicating. One would coo and then the other. And then an old stray dog came up. And the cooing stopped. And I heard the fluttering of those wings as they flew away. And I could see them sitting on a fence way away. They were at rest. They no longer were afraid. they had escaped that which had brought them fear. The psalmist said, "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away, well, that I would just be at rest." And then he explains it a little differently. "Lo, then I would wander off. I would just keep traveling. And I would remain in the wilderness where there's nothing to disturb me. I would hasten my escape when I saw the threat from the storm and from the tempest." I've used that many times in my efforts to preach. But recently, I came back and read it and studied it in its context. The context of this psalm is that there was internal trouble in Israel. We'll come to it in a moment. But there was internal fighting in Israel. Brethren were fighting against brethren. One of the greatest hurts and pains that you could possibly have is that when somebody most dear to you turns against you. When someone that you love the most is unfaithful to you. When folks that you have stood side by side with in life suddenly turn away from you. In the military, the harshest punishment is given out against those who betray their fellow soldiers in battle. A spy that lives alongside their countrymen and then gives them up to the enemy is treated very harshly because they have broken trust. David lived in a country where those closest around him had turned against him. The commentators are all over the place in explaining this. Some think it was Absalom, David's own son Absalom, had turned against him. Some think that's what it was writing about. Some think it was at the time when some of the soldiers turned against him. One thing and one another. You know why he didn't tell us what it was? Because if he'd have told us, we would have said, that doesn't apply to us. But when there's trouble around us, we can flee to this passage. And lest I neglect to mention it, he found relief. He found his rest. And we'll come to it. Let's begin in verse number 1. David begins, this is actually part of a prayer. This is David's prayer. He says, "Give ear to my prayer, O God." Now you know that David knew that God was omnipotent and omnipresent. He knew that. Don't we know that? No matter what's happening around us, don't we know that God He knows about it? And that He has power over it? We know that. We're convinced of that. But when the biblical characters prayed, "Hear me when I pray, give ear unto my prayer," what they're saying is, "Lord, I am in a tough spot. Let me know that you're hearing me. Give me the comfort to know that I'm not out here by myself. Let me know that you're hearing me when I pray. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Lord, reveal yourself." I want to tell you something. When you are in a tough spot, troubles abound, you're brokenhearted, you're discouraged, and fear sets upon you, there's not a greater blessing than to know that God is on scene with you. I've often thought what a blessing it would have been to be able to interview Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Wouldn't you just love to sit down and talk to them? Tell us what it was like. I'm not a fan of the modern news system because they always ask, how did you feel when this happened to you? I hate that question because you know that it made them feel bad. How did you feel when Hurricane Michael come in? How did you? Well, that's a silly question. But I would have loved to ask that to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When they fell down into the midst of that fiery furnace that was 7 times hotter than was necessary, how did you feel when you got to the bottom down there and you suddenly realized, I'm not burning. I'm not hot. But even better than that, how did you feel when that 4th man appeared to you? How did you feel then? Oh, we can all imagine what they would have told us, can't we? How peaceful they were in the midst of that fire. So as we face the fires and the troubles, the tribulations, the fears, and the anguish in this life, and then all of a sudden you get that feeling, well, I am not alone. You get that warm, contented feeling that I'm not by myself, but God is with me. So he says, give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me and hear me. Part of the word is tend. Tend. You know, the word tend and attend is often used in many different ways. My dad would say sometimes, if we were away from home, boys, when we get home, I'm going to tend to you. That wasn't pleasant. That wasn't pleasant. But Mom would say, JC, go in there and tend to your baby brother. You know what that meant? He's crying and he needs something. You go see about him and you find out what's got him in distress and you solve the problem. That's what it meant. So when David is saying to God, attend unto me, that means, Lord, I need some attention here. I'm in trouble. I'm afraid. I feel alone. I'm discouraged. And by the way, in the context of this psalm, everybody's against me. You ever feel that way? I'm out on this limb by myself, and by the way, nobody cares. You ever think that? We'll see that in a moment. So he says, attend to me and hear me. Now he says, and hear me, because David had confidence to know that if God was hearing him, the God that loved him, the God that chose him, he knew that if God was hearing him, something was going to happen. Isn't that comfort? You speak to the God that has opened his throne room for you, and he has all power. You know that when God hears you, something is going to happen. So he says, this is this now, attend to me and hear me. And then he explains why. Why he was in this distress. Why he was pleading so fervently. I mourn in my complaint. I sound like a dove. Mourning. Early in the morning, that mournful sound. I mourn in my prayer. I mourn in my feelings. I'm in distress. I feel broken. I'm against obstacles for which I have no means to recover myself. I mourn in my complaint. I'm bringing it to you, Lord. I'm bringing my mourning to you. I'm laying my troubles before you. 1 Peter 5 and 7. Peter had been there. You talk about mourning. Mourning. Peter was a man that knew about mourning. when the Lord's prophecy was fulfilled, and after he had cursed and denied that he knew his Lord, what did he do? When the cock crew, after he had denied him 3 times, he went out and wept bitterly. His heart was broken. He was of mourning. But who did the Lord address first on the morning of the resurrection? Go tell my brethren and Peter that I am coming. Don't you know that thrilled Peter's heart that the Lord called his name? He was mourning. But Peter said in 1 Peter 5:87, when you're mourning, cast all your cares upon him, for he careth for you. Peter could say that with affirmation. He careth for me. I know that. For it was so bad that even when I cursed and denied that I knew him, he was still caring for me. Isn't that amazing? I mourn in my complaint and make a noise. I'm groaning inside of me. Because my countrymen, my family, my friends are all turning away from me and leaving me so alone. Not only that, they're fighting against me. Then he says, this is the reason I'm praying. Verse number 3, because the voice of the enemy. We'll see in a moment, my own countrymen, those around me, have now become my enemies. I want to read you something. It's a dire warning from a man named Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He lived through some of the worst times in the Soviet Union. He was born in 1918, lived a good portion of his life in the United States when we were able to secure his release to us, and he died back in Russia in 2008. He was a writer. After spending a while in the United States, among the many wonderful things this man said, he said this: as a survivor of the communist Holocaust, I am horrified to witness how my beloved America, my adopted country, is gradually being transformed into a secularist and atheistic utopia, where communist ideals are glorified and promoted, while Judeo-Christian values and morality are ridiculed and increasingly eradicated from the public and social consciousness of our nation. Under the decades-long assault and militant radicalism of many so-called liberal and progressive elites, God has been progressively erased from our public and educational institutions to be replaced with all manner of delusion, perversion, corruption, violence, decadence, and insanity. He told the story. People moved to this country because they cherished what we have. There's a movement in this country to destroy what people came here to enjoy. There is an answer to it. That's the reason David was praying. There was trouble in Zion. But there's an answer. Let's continue. Because of the voice of the enemy is within. Do you know that the United States of America has the most powerful military force in the world? There are weapons that our country has that you have no idea about. Our military force is such that no single country, nor all the countries together, could defeat our military. Unless God backs up and says, you think you can defend yourself. When God backs up from a nation, I don't care how strong, how powerful that nation is, it cannot stand. Okay? So because of the voice of the enemy, and today our greatest enemy is us, our country. Okay? Now, in going through this, I'm trying to bring forward David's thinking. We all go through these thought processes. We hit the valley, but then by the grace of God, we know what's on the other side of that valley. We'll get to it. If I die before I finish this message, don't forget to read the last 2 verses. Okay? Don't read it now. Wait until I die. Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked within, for they cast iniquity upon me. That word iniquity is translated from a word that means wicked troubles. That means they're fighting against me because of who I am. There's great hatred for true Christianity in this country. True belief, true religion is mocked and ridiculed and fought against. Okay? Let me give you an illustration. Under the name of Christian, many go by the name of Christian. But quote for them, if you would, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Okay? Did you know what a God is? It's anything that gets between you and your God. Okay? Oh, what about, and many will say, okay, that sounds good, I like that. When there's all kinds of things between them and their God. What about the one that says, thou shalt not commit adultery? What about that? Thou shalt not bear false witness. What about that? Well, I don't really think that, that fits in our modern day society. That was back then when they had all those things to deal with. This is a different time. God said, I am God and I what? Change not. I don't change. He didn't change his mind about those commandments. As a matter of fact, those commandments are repeated several times in different ways in the New Testament. If you want to know what sin is and what's an abomination to God, read Romans chapter 1. It lays it out. It's an abomination to God. But now we live in a time when those who profess to be Christian, they call evil good and good evil. Okay? So he says, because of the voice of the enemy that is within us, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they cast iniquity upon me, that is wicked troubles, and in wrath they hate me. They literally hate me for who I am and what I believe and what I stand for. By the way, if you're hated for who you are and what you believe, you are in good company. You know that? Because they hated the Son of God, they hated the apostles, and they hated the church of Jesus Christ and drove it out of their country. Then he says, fearfulness and trembling are come upon me. Now let me tell you something. Especially for our young. Folks who mock you because of what you believe trouble you. It's frightening and it's discouraging to feel all alone. I remember as a young man in the military, I sat in the barracks many times when other folks were out doing other things that I won't even mention. And I felt so alone. But in my loneliness, I reached up and got a Bible that my father had given to me. And in that Bible, my Lord said through the old prophet, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. I will never forsake you, and I will not leave you alone. And there's nothing that can separate you from my love. What a blessing. And then I didn't feel so alone anymore. My heart is sore pained within me. My heart is broken because those that I love and those that I respect. Let me share something with you. During and after the Vietnam War, when we traveled, we could not even travel in uniform. Those folks who had spent a year or more in combat in Southeast Asia, when they arrived in San Francisco, the airport there, they were mocked, laughed at, called bad names, and spat upon. And so, we were told, when you travel, don't wear your uniform. But it's amazing how God is able to turn things around. After the Second Gulf War, I was on an airplane, got on an airplane in Atlanta, Georgia. And there was a portion of a unit that was returning home from Afghanistan. Those kids were worn out, tired. They had their uniforms on. They walked on the airplane. And the pilot came on the intercom and said, we'd like to welcome to our aircraft the soldiers. And he gave their unit where they were from. And everybody on that airplane stood up and applauded and welcomed those kids home. My heart rejoiced. There is some good in the midst of all the bad. So my heart is sore pained, and the terrors of death are falling upon me. So what that means is that I don't know if I'm going to make it through this. And it's so bad I don't think I want to. I think I want to just go ahead and die and just get it over with. That's what that means. Then he says, fearfulness and trembling are come upon me. He says, I'm so weak in distress that I'm trembling in the face of those who want to harm me, to turn away from me and leave me alone. He says, fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me. You know what it means to be overwhelmed? Ask a sailor what it means to be overwhelmed. To be overwhelmed means that there's so much water in the boat that it will no longer float. And it starts going down. David is saying, there are so many troubles upon me that I can no longer float. I'm sinking under the weight of my troubles. And I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. For then would I'd just fly away, and I'd be at rest. Lo, then, I'd just wander off, far off, and remain in the wilderness. I'll just go and I won't come back. It's that bad. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and the tempest. I'd just keep going until all was calm and all was peaceful. You know, one day you will. One day. Not today. But one day we will. One day the Lord will say, you know, you've struggled enough. You've dealt with enough. You've had enough heartbreak. So you leave this house of trouble behind, and you come go with me. That's what he was telling the thief on the cross. He says, today, I'm going to take you out of your troubles. Today, you're going with me. Today, thou shalt be with me in paradise. He didn't fly on his own wings. He flew on the Lord's. And he went to rest. Then David's he's given his complaint to the Lord and telling the Lord how he feels. Oh, that I had wings like a dove. Lord, if I just had wings, if you just give me wings like those doves, I'd fly away. I'd leave all this trouble behind. I'd go to the wilderness. I'd never come back again. Oh, if I just had wings like that precious little dove, I'd fly away. But I don't. So he turns back to the Lord. He says, Lord, he says, oh, Lord, he says, destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues. That means a divided tongue is a confused tongue. He says, confuse them, Lord. So you don't know how to pray for all the trouble we've got in our country right now? Pray this prayer, Lord, divide their tongues. Get them all confused, Lord. Did you know that that's how the Tower of Babel came down? They had divided tongues. They were all confused. They got all messed up. Lord, you know the Lord can do that. Let's see, in the military, what do we call that? We call that psychological warfare. You know, use psychological warfare when you have a shooter that's in a building and you're trying to talk him out, don't you? Psychological warfare. Get them all confused. Lord can do that, you know that? He can get them all confused and he can defeat them with confusion. So he says, destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Have we seen violence and strife in the city? We could spend the next 3 or 4 hours talking about all the violence, all the trouble that we've seen, all the killings, all the maiming. We can see all the bad things that happen in our country. We've seen it, haven't we? We've even seen among our politicians. We could talk about that for a while, too. But if you start bringing all that out, all that would do is further discourage you. But I don't want to discourage you. I want you to find the same hope that David found. Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go about it upon the walls thereof. Mischief also and sorrow are in the midst of it. It brings sorrow to us. We have enemies now that come at us from every direction. Do you know they can get in your home and you don't even know that they're there? Did you know that? Now, I'm a proponent of automation in computers. I really am. Much of my career was spent in that environment, and so I'm a strong proponent of automation computers. And I use them every day. But did you know that every time you turn your computer on, you open the door for your enemy? Did you know that? And if you're not careful, that enemy is going to wind up right there in your house. And if you're not careful, they'll take everything you have. The enemy is among us. So he says, destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go about it upon the walls thereof. Mischief also and sorrow are in the midst of it. Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Wickedness, that means extremely bad things. People killing people just to get what they have. Sometimes they kill people just for the joy of killing. It's bad. Wickedness is in the midst thereof, deceit and guile, depart not from her streets. Deceit and guile. What that means is that people will lie to deceive you, to get advantage of you. Let me give you this illustration. I probably told it before. When I got to Germany in 1983, I bought the most beautiful yellow BMW you have ever seen. I mean, that thing was clean. It was beautiful. Had a 5-speed transmission and a high-speed rear end in it. And that engine would run. I mean, it would run like nobody's business. It got up on the Autobahn, and it would do 120 miles an hour in a minute. I hadn't had it a month before I saw some bubbles in the paint. Well, what is that? So I touched the bubble with my thumb, and the paint fell off, and there was rust under it. 2 months later, the whole thing was covered with rust, and that lovely engine was smoking like a freight train. I had been deceived. I was gullible, and the salesman deceived me. I went by to see him one day, and he saw me coming, and he disappeared. Wickedness is in the midst thereof, in deceit and guile. Depart from her streets. You know, oh, by the way, this movement that's in our country, it's labeled socialism. And socialism is a double first cousin to communism. Now, you know the first thing that you lose in a socialist or communist form of communism is your freedom. And one of those freedoms is the freedom of religion. Did you know that for us to worship in China the way we worship here, we would have to hide? Did you know that we're right on the brink of losing our freedom to preach what we believe? Did you know that technically I cannot even read Romans chapter 1 to you? You know why? Because Paul says that sodomy is an abomination. Well, I'm old school. I'm from the country. It's either right or it's wrong. Okay, that's all there is to it. It's either right or it's wrong. If the Bible says it's wrong, what is it? It's wrong. Okay. And we're challenged. Ministers are charged to preach the word. That is, preach the truth. Do you realize how close you are to losing? I have been told that in Canada, that ministers have been forbidden to say what I have just said. Okay? Now, wickedness is in the midst of thereof, deceit and guile, depart not from her streets, for it was not an enemy that reproached me. Are you ready? It was not an enemy, someone from a far country. It was not an enemy that reproached me. Then could I have borne it? You know, you can deal with it if somebody that from outside your company, outside your family, outside your friends, outside your acquaintances, if they attack you, you know, you don't have much problem attacking them back. Okay? Neither was it he that hated me, like somebody from a far country, that did magnify himself against me. Then would I have hid myself from him. Now, I mean, if it had been somebody from afar, I'd have just blown away and forgot about it. But you can't fly away from it in this country. You can't go from one state to another and get away from it. He says, but it was thou, a man mine equal, just like me. You have a man that has the same rights and the same citizenship and the same freedoms that I do. My guide and my acquaintance. He says somebody that I travel with, someone that I communed with, my friends. We took sweet counsel together and walked unto the house of God in company. We even went to church together. We're called Christians together. They're called Christians over here, Christians over there. But are they really? You think they would hear what we preach here? Not hardly. Now watch this. Let death seize upon them. Really? I thought you Christians are supposed to pray for everybody. Listen to what he said. Let death seize upon them and let them go down quick into hell. Boy, that's pretty strong language, isn't it? That's because they had turned away from God, turned away from the truth, and they were worshiping idols and worshiping everything under the sun except God. For wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. That means they're just covered over all around them as wicked. Did you know that we've raised several generations that have no idea what the Bible teaches? I remember Miss Claxton, my third grade teacher. You know what we did every morning? The first thing we did, she read a passage of Scripture and we prayed. And you know, we all made it to adulthood. How about that? It didn't corrupt any of us, but it made us stronger. It gave us a foundation. What will the righteous do if the foundations be destroyed? Well, there's another associated message. If you take the foundation of the gospel truth out of our society, what are we going to do? We're going to be in a mess. We're going to pray this prayer. Then he says, as for me, all this is going on. As for me, what am I going to do when all this is going on? He's already mourned. Well, oh, that I had wings like I dove. Well, then would I fly away and be around? That was his mourning. Then after he refreshes his mind in prayer, he says, as for me, while all this wickedness and all this ungodliness is going on, as for me, I will call upon God. I'm going to talk to him about this. I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. That means the Lord is going to take care of me. What did Job say? I know that my Redeemer liveth. I know that. He is not going to leave me alone. He is going to help me through this trouble. Now, verse number 17. Evening and morning and at noon. That means morning, noon, and night. What am I going to do? What are you going to do? What are we going to do? What do we do morning, noon, and night? What do we do? If you ain't praying, that's what we said in Perry, if you ain't praying, get started. Morning, or evening, morning, and noon. You know the reason he starts in the evening? Because the Lord started in the evening. He says the evening and the morning was the first day, okay? So the Lord starts in the evening. So the evening tonight, before you go to sleep, pray. You know, and I do that. I hesitate talking about my prayers, my private prayers, because to me it sounds like, boy, you saying what a good boy. You're a fine young man. You pray a lot. But you know, Daniel wasn't ashamed to talk about his prayers. David's not ashamed to talk about his prayers. So at night, I have to wear an old silly CPAP mask. I have to wear this thing. That's the most ominous looking thing you've ever seen in your life, but I have to wear that thing. I'm convinced that I have to wear it. So I put it on, I get all set up, and then I lay down. Then I start over here. I know where everybody sits. Do you know y'all always sit in the same place? So I go from one to the other, and I ask the Lord. I even know there were some set that don't attend here anymore. And I pray for them. I go all around the room to everybody. Then when I pray for you all, I move to our family. Then when I finish with the family, I move to the country, to our military folks, to our law enforcement folks. I pray. When I get up in the morning, I stagger back to my desk. The first thing I do, I call up our prayer list. And then I have my own private prayer list every morning. Now I confess at noon, it's usually not that thorough, but at noon I'm praying too. And by the way, I am such a bad guy, so bad that I have to stop several other times during the day and pray. I need some help with this, Lord. I can't solve this problem. Did you know that the Lord is even the best mechanic in the world? He sure is. He can solve any problem that you have. He can solve every problem that our country has. You know that? You believe that? Do you really believe that? Did you know that prayer is that one weapon that Satan cannot take away from you? He can get about everything else if God allows it. By the way, he can't take anything that God don't allow him to take. But when everything else is stripped away, you still got the power of prayer. And it's powerful because you're speaking in the ear of the God who created the universe. All right? Gotta hurry now. Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings, and among them. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. That's confidence. He will hear my voice. You know, I knew that if I was in earshot of my dad and called him, he would hear me. Do you know that? He'll hear me. And by the way, there were times when I wasn't in earshot of my dad. I can tell you some experiences about that, but I'm about to run out of time. But you're never out of earshot from God. You're never where he can't hear you. All right? And he shall hear my voice. He hath delivered me. I like this now. I read this again early this morning. And I want to write that. I want you to call every one of you right there and say, I need to tell you something. Now listen to this. This is a man that said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. For then when I fly away, I'll just escape. I'll go into the wilderness and never come back. He hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me. What is the tense of that phrase? Hath. That means it's in the past tense. He's done it in the past. So has God delivered you in the past this morning? So he hath done it. For there were many with me back there in those days. I'm by myself now, but back there in those days there were many with me, but God is the one that delivered me. Then he says, God shall hear and afflict them. He delivered me then, and I know that he's going to deliver me again. That's the power of positive thinking. You heard of the power of positive thinking? You know, classically, the civil power of positive thinking is, I know that I have enough brain power to figure this out. I know that I have enough strength to solve this problem. I know that I can do it. I know that I can. Really. Have you ever found something that you could not possibly do? I got a long list of those too. But let me tell you something. If it's right and pleasing with the Lord, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. Did you know that? Now, so he hath delivered, and he's going to do it again. God shall hear and afflict them. That means God is going to win this battle. Did you know that your God is the God of battles? He's the God of victory. He has never lost a battle, and he's not going to lose this battle. You know why I'm confident of that? Because all around this country, there are people worshiping God in spirit and in truth and crying out to him. There's another point. When they're worshiping him, they're crying out to him in confidence that he is going to hear them. Yesterday, we had just a little sampling of it yesterday morning. What would you venture to say? We had about 200 there yesterday morning, something close to that? Something like that. How many preachers were there? 24 preachers were there. We were there worshiping. And one of the amazing things about that meeting was virtually every sermon dealt with the fundamentals of doctrine. And the fundamentals of doctrine says is God is strong and I am weak. God is perfect and I am not. God is my Savior and I am not. That's the fundamentals of the doctrine. That was preached over and over again. Some ministers were highly educated, were able to articulate well. Some were from the country and used country language and country matters, but they preached that God is strong and I am weak. I rejoiced in it. Now, He hath delivered, and He's going to deliver me again. God shall hear and afflict them, even he that abideth of old. That means that God has always been there. You know that your God has always been there. The same God that we pray to this morning is the same God that said, let there be light. That's good news, isn't it? And by the way, He's going to be the same God that's on the throne when He turns out that light. Now, verse number 20. And He hath put forth His hands against such as be at peace with Him. He hath put forth His hands against such as be at peace with Him. He hath broken His covenant. Now, He's talking about here not God. He's talking about those that be our enemies. Our enemies, are treacherous. He hath put forth His hands against such as be at peace with Him. He says, so those who are at peace. Let me illustrate this passage this way. The church at Damascus, the picture was painted that they were at peace, right? They were at peace. They were worshiping. They were singing. They were praying. They were preaching. What was Paul on the way to do there? He was on his way there to destroy their peace, to take them away and imprison them. He was on the way to do that. Even so much when the Lord said to Ananias, I want you to go over there and lay hands on me. Ananias said, Lord, let me talk to you. When Ananias said, I've heard about this man. But the Lord communicated to him, that man's over there praying. When Ananias heard that, he got up and he went and laid hands on Paul. So the one that came to destroy the peace at Damascus, in turn preached peace to them. That's amazing. That's the God that we worship this morning. Can God turn the hearts of the wicked? You better say amen. Because He can do it. Now, moving along quickly. Skip on down to verse number 22. I like this. Cast thy burden upon the Lord. Cast thy burden upon the Lord. It's what Peter said. Cast thy cares upon Him, for He careth for they. You know what that means? Lord, I can't solve this. Lord, this problem is bigger than me. I don't know how to fix all these political issues. I don't know how to fix all of those who are against God and against godliness. I don't know how to do that, Lord. So I'm going to leave them in your hand, and I'm going to worship you. I'm going to sing, I'm going to pray, I'm going to preach, I'm going to cry out to you, and I'm going to be ready to give an answer to all of those who ask a reason to hope that's in me, whether they like it or not. You know there's some that ask you a reason of the hope that's in you, and all they want to do is mock you? You know what you do? You tell them anyway. You know why you want to tell them anyway? Because one day the Holy Spirit may deal with that wicked heart, and when the Spirit deals with that wicked heart, you want them to remember the joy that you have in the Lord. All right? Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and He shall sustain thee. Now, sustain doesn't always mean like the dog fleeing the trouble. Sustain doesn't necessarily mean leaving the trouble. Sustain means able to deal with it. The strength to deal with it. The strength to go on. The strength to smile when there's nothing to smile about. Is that true? You can't see anything around you to smile at. But if you look up, you've got something to smile about. I know that my Redeemer liveth. He wasn't looking at his friends. He wasn't looking at himself. And sure as well wasn't looking at his wife, who's that cursed God and died. But he looked up and he said, I know that my Redeemer liveth. What did Stephen do? He looked up and he saw the window of heaven open. He said, I see the Lord standing on the right hand of the throne of God. There he is right there. I don't care what was said or done to him. That man was at peace. He had something to smile about, didn't he? Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. But thou, O God, here we go. Okay, ready? But thou, O God, shall bring them down into the pit of destruction. By the way, hell means destruction. Those who fight against God, their days are numbered. Okay? Then it says, bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days. Their days are numbered. But, well, I'm waiting on the Lord to solve this problem, but I will trust in Thee. Lord, I know it's a good thought to fly away and be at rest. I know it is. You ever like to think about that? I do. I think about it sometimes. Man, I've traveled all over the Midwest. I've seen some barren places out there where you could see forever and ever and ever. I think, man, what would it be like to have a little cabin out there? So far that it took, you'd have to drive 50 miles to get to where I live. I had thought about that, how pleasant that would be. Thought it would be pretty pleasant until you got a sandstorm or something, then it wouldn't be so pleasant. But David said, Lord, I thought about that, about flying away and being at rest. But on the other hand, Lord, I know that you're going to sustain me. And I know that you're going to defeat the enemy. So while I'm waiting on you to take care of that, Lord, I'm just going to trust in you and serve you. May God